What's going on, everybody? Hope you're having a great day. Today we are going to be taking a look at the latest version of Sprite Replicator, and that it's going to be a really exciting video because Sprite Replicator has actually gone 3D. So just take a look at this photo manipulation I made pretty quickly the other day. You see that it's a scene of paratroopers, and they are all everywhere in the image. And if you look closely, you might notice that it's actually the same paratrooper, but they're scattered randomly around the image, and you can see a lot of depth going on here. So the bigger ones are in front of the smaller ones because that's how distance works. And if we turn off this, you might see we even have some depth of field going on, which obviously you make by having one sprite replicator layer in front that's less blurred and another one in the back that is more blurred. Except it's not. It's it's all one layer here because the new Sprite Replicator has some really powerful tools, and that's what we're going to be taking a look at today. So let's pull up Sprite Replicator and get started. This is actually the desktop app that I'm using right now. Sprite Replicator is also available on our website to use as a web app that you can use completely online. It's totally free. The desktop app is also free, but the web app hasn't been tested on all browsers, so if you have any issues with that, I'd recommend going on the desktop app. It's completely free. Now, the first thing you see when you open Sprite Replicator, which by the way, I'll drop the link to this in the description, but the first thing you see is our new home screen, which shows a bunch of green balls, and we have image width and image height. Now that's just your document size in Photopea or whatever. And so the default is 1920 by 1080, and just for demonstration purposes, we can use that and get started. Now you'll see on the left we have our image, and you can use your mouse to drag that around. And on the right we have a nice little control panel, different accordion sections there. And on the top we have our picker for what background we want. So depending on the image you're working with, it might be easier to see on black, it might be easier to see on white, it might be easier to see on this transparent grid. So you can around with that if it helps with your workflow. And the first thing I'm going to do here is actually open the duplicates section and set the count to 0. So that way we have 0 duplicates. All we have on screen is a single sprite. And the reason I'm doing that is so that now when we open the base section, we can really see what's going on here. The X just controls the X position of this little ball I have right here. The Y controls its Y position. That's pretty basic. As you saw earlier, you can also just use your mouse to click and drag. We have angle, and this just rotates it. Pretty neat. And then scale changes its size. Talk more about that later. The default is 1, and that just fits with the original image size. So this ball is 256 by 256 pixels. So that's how it's being displayed here. So it's a 1920 by 1080 image, and this pixel size is exactly what the size of the actual image is. So you might have to adjust scale based on what texture you use. I'll talk more about textures later. And alpha is just opacity, so you can mess with that. Now, it really gets to the replicator part where when we open duplicates and bump up the count a little bit. Now count is just the number of duplicates, so 20 means we have 20 more balls on the screen on top of the base one. And we can set the blend mode. That just says the blend mode between each sprite. Let's keep it at normal for now. And the real power of this comes from these variance controls. So all of these variance controls change a certain property of the base image and uses a random number generator to control that. So if I have 0x variance and 0y variance, that means all of the duplicates are going to be at the same position as the base sprite. But if we bump up the variance to, let's say 500, that means the position of the balls is going to vary by up to 500 away from the base. Same thing for Y variance. And as I said, Sprite Replicator is now 3D, so we have Z variance here. That kind of moves it around in 3D space. It's pretty cool. And we also have size variance, which kind of looks like it does a similar thing because it changes everything's size, but you'll notice that if I drop the Z variance down to 0 and bump up the size variance, some of the smaller balls will appear in front of the bigger balls, which maybe that's what you want if the smaller balls are just smaller, but you'll see that this doesn't really give a good sense of perspective because if these balls were all the same size, the bigger ones should appear in front. So let's bump up the Z variance for now and look at angle variance. That just changes how much they can rotate. Alpha variance changes how much they can fade out. Exposure variance, same thing but for exposure. Hue variance helps with the colors, so that looks pretty cool. And then saturation variance will change the saturation, so you'll notice that some of the balls get less saturated, whereas some of them get more saturated. So you'll see this one, this blue one in the corner, that's at 0 and that's at 100. Random seed just controls the seed, so you can get different variations of the pattern. And now, here's where the cool stuff comes in. We have a camera control. First thing you see is camera distance. Now that just controls where the camera is in 3D space. So right now it's at -500, meaning that my ball is at a Z position of 0 and the camera is 500 away from the base ball or the ball at the base. Um, then we have fog. Oh yeah, by the way, the camera distance you can actually control using your scroll wheel. So if you can zoom in by scrolling up, zoom out by scrolling down. Then we have fog, which basically fades things out um, based on how far they are from the camera. So if you see the camera moving closer, it's like moving through the fog. Objects objects get clearer. You can go through this ball. There's a really high fog value, but a lower one really helps with conveying depth. And then we have focal depth, which you see doesn't really do much right now. But now, if I increase field blur, you can kind of see what's going on here. camera distance back to 500, and um, you see that we have some pretty nice depth of field. And the focal depth just controls where the focus is. So if I decrease this, you'll notice that the balls closer to the camera are more in focus. Increase this, you notice that we have more focus farther away, and everything closer than that gets really blurred. Now, field blur does slow down, it does take some time to render, so the preview will slow down. So I would recommend changing your values up here first, keeping the field blur at 0, and then at the end you can add the depth of field. And then we have a tab called Forces, which includes a few different options that will um, vary these sprites beyond just the controls you have here. First is Grid Snap. So the whatever value you set here is going to be the kind of value that's the length of the grid, the distance between um, balls. So if it's a high value, you notice that they're all lined up into uh, distances of 200 apart from each other. If it's at 0, then it's just normal. If it's at 104, all the balls are 104 away from the next one. Now there's gravity, which just kind of what it sounds like. It moves stuff down, and you can change the angle. So if it's 0, you move stuff to the right, and they all kind of move the same distance right now, which you might find strange. You might find strange, like why don't we just move it instead of using gravity? Now here's where size variance kind of kicks in. So if I decrease the Z variance a little and I up size variance, you'll notice that the bigger balls fall faster. Now maybe I want certain balls to fall faster than the other ones, but I don't want that size variance. That's fine. We can set the size variance back to 0 and actually use density variance. And what that will do is it won't change how the balls look, but some of them will be inherently heavier than the other ones, and they will move faster. Now we also have fading, which is, it says mass fading, so you know it's based on the mass of the ball. It works with size variance and density variance. That'll just fade out the balls that are more massive. So if, for example, I use the plasma texture, bump down the variance there, and up some density variance, what I can do with mass fading is actually create a line that fades out, which is pretty cool. You can use it for effects like fire and smoke. Now, speaking of texture, you'll see that the new Sprite Replicator update has more options than uh, previously. Now you can have multiple textures, which you couldn't in the past. So let's take a look at that real quick. I'll maybe just change some of my settings back to normal, no more forces. And let's go back to the ball texture. You'll notice that I can either import a PNG file or use a built-in texture. And if I import a file, let's find an explosion I have. Okay, I have some variance settings here. The hue variance is a little much. Let me turn down the scale. And it kind of looks like there are different explosions across the screen. But if you look closely, you can kind of tell that they're all the same one. So that's why the new Sprite Replicator lets you upload multiple textures. So if I hit the plus, I can add a different explosion. Um, that's the same one, sorry. And then I can even add another one after that. And Sprite Replicator will randomly assign a different texture to each of the sprites. So we have 3 different types of explosions going on here, and now it looks a lot more random. And once you have an image that you're happy with, you can export it and use it in your artwork. Now you can also use Sprite Replicator as a Photopea plugin, which we can take a look at right now. So back in Photopea, I have my paratrooper image again, and we can actually take a look at how I made this specific image. Let's get rid of that for real quick. And I have an image of a paratrooper that I masked out and converted to a smart object. And if I install the Sprite Replicator plugin from the plugins menu, it's right over here, I'll see the Sprite Replicator icon in the sidebar. And if I open it, hit go, I can actually open the textures panel and use current layer. Now if current layer is not a smart object, it'll tell me I have to use a smart object. But here I'll select the paratrooper image I got, hit use current layer, it'll import that smart object into Sprite Replicator, which is pretty cool. I might expand this so it's easier to see what I'm doing. And yeah, I can just increase X variance, increase Y variance, increase Z variance, uh, change the angle a little bit, change the angle variance so looks a little more random. Add some fog. Maybe if I zoom in, add some field blur. And after that, maybe I can just play around with the settings a little bit more. But after that, I can just hit export. The image will be loaded directly into Photopea, and I can do a little bit of color correction, and that is my image. So as you can see, I made a kind of complicated looking effect really quickly. And that's kind of the power of Sprite Replicator. And it's not just the speed, it's also this kind of random quality that you get that maybe I could place all of these paratroopers in manually, but we tend to not be great at making random things. It would end up not looking this random because I didn't use a random number generator like Sprite Replicator does. So I hope that that video was helpful. hope you can do some great things with Sprite Replicator, and feel free to drop any questions, any concerns, any feedback in the comments, and I'd love to hear from you. So thanks for watching. Have a great day.